Hello and welcome to episode 72 of the Footy with Fletch podcast. I'm joined by former Essendon and Carlton player Justin Madden. He played a total of 332 games and kicked 190 goals. He's a two-time Premiership player at Carlton, two-time club best and fairest, and one-time All-Australian. Hello Justin, thanks for joining me on the podcast today. How are you doing?
I'm good, Fletch. Thanks for having us on. And I played a long time ago, so it's not very often I have to talk about my career from decades ago, but happy to do it today.
And what's it like looking back on your career? Because you had a lot of highlights. What did you make of your time in footy?
Oh, look, it was a wonderful time. It was a lot of hard work in those days. It's probably still hard work these days, but it's different. In our day, it was semi-professional and part-time. So it meant that for most of my football career, I either worked or studied outside of my football hours. And football was really a thing you sort of did from about 4 o'clock in the afternoon most days. So you went off to training, trained for several hours, had a few meetings and came home pretty tired, had your dinner, and by then you'd sort of watch half an hour of television, go to bed. And that there were a few years of that. But it was great. We had I don't think we had as much pressure on us as the players do today. We didn't have social media. We didn't have people commenting on our games from all places. And the other thing too was it was just a bit more fun, I think. I think that because it was part-time, semi-professional, whilst it was really important, it wasn't probably as life or death like today's football seems to be. Today it's pretty serious and there's a lot at stake. There was plenty at stake in our day, but maybe it wasn't as dramatic, I think.
And you've got the nickname Harry. How did that come about?
Oh, nothing particularly special. I arrived at Carlton, and in those days we used to play most of our games on a Saturday, and we would train on a Sunday morning and have a recovery session, and we'd play different sorts of sports. So David Parker was a phys ed teacher and lecturer at I think it was Rusden in those days, and he used to sort of produce a different bag of equipment each time we turn up for training, and we'd do something different rather than just run a few laps or run around the park. So we'd play a different sport, touch rugby or touch netball or something, or would touch basketball, something light but a bit of fun. And I didn't seem to be much good at any of them. And there'd been a guy who just left before me who they thought wasn't as very coordinated, and his name was Harry. So they just gave me the name Harry as if I sort of followed on naturally from the bloke who'd left, because I wasn't much chop at most things, and probably they thought for a while footy as well. But go on, yes, please, Fletch.
And you were a bit of a jokester around the club. How did that come about?
Oh, look, it's probably just a bit of my personality. It was, it got a bit serious at times, and when you're not winning as often as you'd like, or it's a bit of hard work, you just got to try and entertain yourself and make it a bit of fun. So I would just try and be a bit silly, and that came pretty naturally to me, being silly, whether it was on the field or off the field. So it wasn't so much that I consciously went about sort of playing practical jokes on people, but those opportunities arose and we'd do a few funny things, and hence I got a bit of a reputation for being a bit annoying and a bit silly. I'm the youngest of three boys, and so I spent my life being annoying. I learned it at a very early age and probably persisted in most of the careers I pursued.
And for people like myself who never got to watch you live, how would you describe yourself as a footballer?
I certainly was. I wouldn't fit the category of sort of today's athletes. In our day, the game was a bit slower, and the conditions weren't as good. Like you've got a roof stadium at Marvel with beautiful surface. It's never really muddy, and So most of the other grounds are of that standard as well. The MCG is magnificent, but in our day, the ground was often heavy. We had winters that seemed to rain a lot more than today for various reasons. They used to have the cricket pitches in the ground, the centre of the ground, for over the summer. So by winter they were pretty boggy, particularly with a bit of rain. So the game was a lot slower. It was a lot muddier, a lot messier, and that probably suited me because it slowed the game down a bit. I was a sort of a slow horse, and so it allowed me to sort of play to those conditions, and it worked pretty well. I think I'd struggle in today's game because the ball moves pretty fast. Maybe I'd be all right on some of the smaller grounds, but on some of the bigger grounds, I just probably wouldn't make the distance in time, I think.
And then back in your career as well, a commentator once said in a marking contest that you just stood there like a big beanpole. Do you remember that comment?
Oh, I don't. There were a lot of comments about, there was some very entertaining commentators in our day, and they were a little bit more lighthearted, probably could get away with saying things those days that they, mightn't necessarily use today. And so they said, funny things. We took them in good spirit. I don't remember that one, but I was called a number of things. I think I was called a blancmange at one stage, which is a delicate French pastry, apparently. I've never had one, but for a while there, I probably wasn't going in hard enough. So one of the commentators thought I was a bit like a French pastry, which wasn't terribly flattering, but those were the things that went with football in those days. Your critics were from the media more than social media, so we didn't get criticised too often, and we didn't take it too personally.
And your brother Simon was a fantastic footballer as well. What was it like to play with him early on in your time at the Bombers?
Yeah, it was pretty exciting for me as a young footballer. Simon started playing. So Simon's 3.5 years older than me, and Simon started playing senior football at Essendon when he was 16. So he was in what was the equivalent today of year 11, and I think I was in year 8 or something. So for your older brother or your bigger brother to be playing AFL football was a big deal. But at that age, when you're in year 8, you're not sure whether I wasn't sure if I could play any footy at all. So it was a big deal. So eventually I played my first senior game. I think I was 19. So that was by then, Simon was 20, 20, 22, 23. And that was a big deal for me as a young man. But I also saw how tough and hard it was, and maybe your football career wasn't going to last too long. So you sort of had to establish yourself and then make the most of every opportunity. So that's what I tried to do. And then I eventually went to Carlton because I could see that Simon and I were playing in the same team. Whilst it was of some benefit to the team and the club, it meant that one of us or both of us sort of were not being used to our fullest and probably not being paid to our fullest either. So I thought there's an opportunity here at Carlton, so I might take it. So that's what I did. I went off to Carlton and had a fairly long career, which was a great surprise to me because I didn't think my career would last that long because, as I said, I was a slow old horse and I thought the game would sort of race past me, but I was able to hang in there for a few years.
And what's it like nowadays, currently? Because the rucks of the present, you look at Tom de Koning, he's so athletic, he can jump, he's got great agility. What do you make of the current ruckman compared to the rucks back in your day?
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? Because they're wonderfully athletic, they're fantastic, but the game and the way the the game doesn't sort of control the rucking contest the way it used to, and the ruck contests are different in the sense that the line across the centre and the smaller circle means they don't get a decent run up to jump at the ball, so they end up sort of wrestling, and that takes a big it takes one of the big bits of a ruckman's game away from them, particularly if they're particularly athletic. So it's a shame that the athleticism of the ruck is not displayed to its fullest because of the way in which the setup of the centre bounce is, which is a big shame. And because they sort of now allow ruckmen to wrestle with each other rather than encourage them to jump at each other. And that's the rules more than anything. I think it makes ruck contests look pretty messy and not particularly pretty. And I think that's to the detriment of the game. If they're able to sort of tidy that up and clarify the rules, then the umpires do have difficulty with interpreting the rules around ruck play, because you never see an umpire who's ever played in the ruck before. So that it's not easy for them to understand the subtleties or lack thereof of the way people go about their ruck work, and it's a bit of a shame because I think it's made ruck work look uglier. And then people say, "Oh, do we need ruckmen or not?" Well, we certainly do, but I think it undermines the poetic craft of ruck work.
Well, I guess the other thing is as well, at least you don't have to deal with all these different rules because it really is confusing, and at times the bounce, there's a lot of issues with bouncers needing to be recalled. So if there was one thing you could change with a ruck contest currently, what would you do?
Well, what I'd do is I would encourage the umpires, both boundary and the main umpires, the field umpires, to not bounce or throw the ball so high or so long, because what that does is the longer the ball's in the air, the more time the ruckmen have to, or the rucks have to sort of wrestle with each other, which is not pretty. If it goes up not so high, they've got to get to the ball sooner. And it also cleans up the stuff around the edges of the ruck setup. It means players can't take each other out for as long. So it means that the midfielders or the running players on the ground have to concentrate on the ball rather than concentrate on trying to take somebody out of the play. So I would encourage those who control the rules of the game to get the umpires to not bounce the ball so high or not throw it in so far. The other thing that does too is it takes up valuable seconds. So if you count down how long a bounce takes and how long it's in the air for, likewise a boundary throw, and they take up 4 or 5 seconds, which at particular stages of the game can be quite valuable. And the clock counts down when you prefer to have football being played rather than wait for the ball to arrive.
And in your Carlton debut, you kicked 5 goals in the game. The Blues were 37 points down at quarter time and then kicked 13 goals in the second quarter. What do you recall from your debut with the Blues?
I don't recall a lot. I know we played in Sydney, and that was a big deal in those days to travel up to Sydney. The ground is smaller, and I think that's always an advantage to a bigger player, a taller player, because you're sort of in the line of sight of people when they're kicking down the field. I was playing in the forward pocket for a lot of that game, and the ball came down a lot in that quarter in particular, in that second quarter, and we sort of got a run on. So that was pretty handy, and I got a few goals. I think only one other time I might have kicked something similar to that number. So that was a big deal, not only because it was the first game, but it was probably the most goals I kicked. Most of the time I played in the ruck. After that, I didn't play in the forward pocket a lot. I did change from the forward pocket into the ruck or vice versa, but it wasn't very often that I played in the forward line on a regular basis for much of the game. So it went well. I was pretty happy and pretty excited, but a lot of the rest of the game I don't recall because I was sort of concentrating on trying to get to the football as much as anything.
And what was it like when you did have the opportunity to float forward as a ruck? Did you enjoy going down forward?
I did. You had to be careful because the idea was not to get in the way of probably your centre half forward or your full forward. So you had to sort of be very conscious of staying out of harm's way in a sense, and also but make yourself relevant. So you had to be a target, but you knew that you weren't always going to be used as the respective target. So being in the forward line wasn't necessarily easy for a big player. You sort of had to just sort of stand in the goal square and hopefully the ball would come to you and let the others do the running up the field. Towards the end of my career, I used to float. I used to play on the ruck and float across into the forward line on a bit of an angle as an alternate option, and it seemed to work on a few occasions. So towards the end of my career, I got a few more goals than I thought I should have, just because the opposing ruckman didn't anticipate they would go deep, and if you floated into the forward line a bit and created an option, particularly if you went in other players' way, sometimes you'd get a kick, and I did, and I got a few extra goals towards the end of my career than I thought, probably than I should have.
And you're a two-time Carlton Best and Fairest winner. What was it like to win two Best and Fairests?
Oh, look, it's. I think the winner best and fairest in your club is it's pretty exciting because you battle through the season. Hopefully the season's worthwhile and the team finishes well. And sometimes when you've had seasons as a team that have not gone your way, you're sort of a bit disappointed. So if you perform well in terms of the vote count, the season's behind you. You can't influence it at all. But if you collect a few votes, it can be quite a compliment to your footballing ability, I suppose. And to win a best and fairest or two is a great privilege. So it's quite flattering. So I was. I thought I may never play league football, let alone win an award. So to win a couple of awards was a great privilege and very exciting for a young man. Yeah.
And then in 1985, you finished runners-up in the Brownlow Medal, one vote behind Brad Hardy, so you could have tied for the Brownlow Medal. What was it like to finish runner-up in the Brownlow Medal as a ruck?
Well, in those days, I used to give votes to ruckman. I don't think they do so much now. I think you've basically got to be a midfielder to win the Brownlow Medal these days. But in those days, the ruckman got a bit of a look in terms of the vote count. The other aspect of that too was there weren't as many umpires. One or two umpires across my career. I don't think the third umpire had arrived, or even more, until after my football career. So the ruckman spent a lot of time also in and around where the umpires were, particularly if they dropped back. If there were two umpires, one would often sit back, and it was very similar to the ruckman. The ruckman would sometimes sit back when it was in the forward line, and you would give your forwards plenty of room by holding back a bit. But the umpires would do that as well. So the umpires would often sort of sit across the centre or the edge of the square and watch the play down the field while the other umpire took over. And so it gave you a chance to sort of have a bit of a chat to the umpires as well. So I'm sure, some of the jokes I tried out on some of those umpires probably helped me get a few votes here and there as well.
And then in 1987, you played in your first premiership with the Blues where Carlton defeated Hawthorn. What was it like to play in your first premiership?
Oh, it was wonderful because we'd lost the year before. We played Hawthorn the year before and they'd sort of really thumped us in the grand final. So we're a little bit undercooked. So we're pretty desperate to prove ourselves in that following year in 87. And we played Hawthorn again. And we certainly understood what a grand final was about. I think as grand finals have become a bigger and bigger event, when you play in your first grand final, it's a bit not so much intimidating, but it's you're learning a lot about the focus, the pressure, the intensity, the excitement, all those things that are different from probably any other match you might play. It's similar to finals footy, but it's dialed up a bit more when you're playing a grand final, and the eyes of the country are on you. So you do sort of get it. You do feel some pressure, and people around you, your friends and family, are all very excited for you, so they relay that. So not that it throws you, but there's a lot happening, and so when you're playing your first grand final, there's a lot to take in, and sometimes by the time you get to the game, you can be pretty tired before you've even started, just because of the anticipation. Second round final, we knew what we were up against. We knew the team we had to play pretty well. I think we finished in a better position at the end of that year. And fortunately for us, Hawthorn had played a big game the week before, I think. They played a big game against Melbourne where Melbourne and Hawthorn really battled it out. And we knew that we would have a week off going into the grand final. So we knew we were pretty fresh and had a feeling that Hawthorn were pretty, potentially pretty tired from their game against Melbourne. So we went in feeling good, not overly confident, but we felt we could we could beat them on the day, and we did in the end, and we did that pretty soundly. And you got to have a bit of luck going into the finals, a bit more luck to make the grand final, and overcome all those other distractions that take place in the lead up to it. So to get there is a culmination of a lot of work. You share it with your teammates for the rest of your life. Every now and then you catch up and recount the season and the stories that go with it. So it's a wonderful thing to look back on, and you appreciate it more the longer the longer you live, I suppose.
And then in that 1987 grand final, you received a 2-match ban for striking Michael Tuck. What do you remember from that incident?
Well, I remember he was playing in a long sleeve jumper, which was really unusual. I know he was playing in a short sleeve jumper. Michael Tuck normally wore a long sleeve jumper. He was wearing a short sleeve jumper that day, which was sort of a bit different for Michael Tuck because it was a really hot day. I think it was about 30 degrees. It was a beautiful day, but not necessarily the sort of temperatures you want for a final. Might be if you're watching, but not necessarily if you're playing. And I remember him taking the ball, I think, in a centre bounce and him being in my way, and I collected him. And apparently it wasn't within the rules. So I wasn't surprised I got reported and suspended. But, those things happen in a grand final, I suppose.
And then in 1993 at Waverley Park in a final against the Crows, you kicked a wonderful goal where you took a couple of bounces. What do you remember from that moment?
Oh, it was a funny moment because if I recall, it's all right. I was getting a bit tired. In those days, I used to ruck all day and didn't interchange. That suited me, and it suited the team. And I think I was a bit tired, and I didn't run deep into the back line. I thought I'll pause here because I had a bit of confidence in Michael Sexton and Peter Dean and those sorts of players, the half back line, that they would defend, and they didn't necessarily need me to help them too much. So I sat around the centre rather than going deep into our back line, and sure enough, the ball came out across to Greg Williams, and Greg Williams spotted me in the centre from the wing and kicked the ball, and so I was sort of there on my own. So Sean Wren, who was the competing ruckman for Adelaide, was probably 20 metres away from me. And he had to cover a lot of ground to get close to me, which he could do, but I was still, we're not the fastest players, or weren't the fastest players on the field. And as I ran down the ground, I was anticipating that Adelaide would run towards me and I could handball it over the Adelaide player's head to my running teammate, Ron DeLulio. But as he sort of peeled off, the Adelaide player went with him. So they opened up this big path for me to keep running. And I thought, gosh, I'm not sure I know what to do here. So I thought I'd better have a bounce, kept running, waiting for that setup to occur, and it didn't. The Adelaide kept peeling off. I got another bounce, and by then I just thought I've got to kick it in the forward line, and it bounced through for a goal. I hadn't actually aimed for the goals. I'd actually aimed for Stephen Kernahan, but by then he was halfway up the field because he'd run so far, and I'd run so far. And it bounced through, and I recall the crowd laughing. And most of the time you don't hear the crowd other than the sort of static noise of the sort of background noise. But on this occasion, rather than cheering, I could hear laughing and laughter. And I think my teammates were laughing as well. And, the morale of Adelaide slumped pretty quickly because I think they realised if I could do that, there was something wrong with their game plan, which there obviously was. And I think we ended up winning the game by a reasonable amount in the end, but we were behind at that time, and I think that helped convince Adelaide that there was something wrong with the game plan.
And then you won your second premiership in 1995. What's it like to be a two-time premiership player?
Well, it's pretty exciting because, first time, it's not as if you fluke it, but the first time you think, oh, well, this is a wonderful thing. It may be the only time it happens. And to get another chance later in your career, I was in my 30s by then, and I thought I was on I was not going to last much longer as a footballer, so I thought my career was basically over. And as you get a bit older, you're not sure you're going to last the whole season, either through injury or just sort of young players beginning to prove themselves. So I wasn't sure I was going to play out the entire 95 season in the seniors. It went pretty well, and we won a grand final, and it was fantastic because at the end of your career, you're not necessarily expecting that, or towards the end of your career, you're not necessarily expecting it, but if it happens, wonderful. And it was. And that, the remarkable thing is that's, it's a long time ago now, well, it's 30 years ago, but we had a reunion recently, and, most of the players were all in good shape and good form, and it's one of those great things you can reflect upon and celebrate later in your life. And I suppose as you get older, you appreciate those opportunities. And the other thing you appreciate is to play in one grand final across your career and win it is a great thing. To play in two premierships is, at least twice as good, but you value it even more when you know that there are outstanding players playing at the moment, getting to the latter stages of their career, who may not play in a grand final and may not play in a premiership. So for all those awards, all those achievements, unless you can play in a premiership team, you feel like you may feel like you've missed something. And I think if you don't get to play in a premiership team as a footballer who plays a lot of games, then you've got some reason to be a little bit disappointed that you didn't get there when others have before you.
And there's a portrait of you titled Justin Madden and the Featherstone Chair. That portrait is now at Princess Park in a converted corporate box. Tell me a little bit about that portrait and how it came about.
Oh, some friends, some very good friends of ours, their son is quite a talented artist. He's a painter, and he's very good at portraiture. And so he wanted to enter the Archibald Prize and asked could he do a painting of my good self. And I was quite happy to allow him to do the painting, and he entered it, and it didn't win an award, but he's quite talented, and the painting's a beauty. But of course, it's not the sort of painting that I'm going to put on my wall because it's quite large. I don't want to look at myself any more than when I'm shaving in the mornings and look at myself in the mirror. That's enough. So there's this quite large portrait of me sitting in a nice, comfortable Featherstone chair, which I do like to do, sit down, and it's a great painting. But his family donated it to the Carlton Football Club, so it sits there as part of their collection of various memorabilia. As part of the Blues Museum, I suppose you best describe it as. So there it is.
And then you retired in 1996. How hard or how easy was that decision to reach to retire?
Yeah, look, it's not easy to leave your football club when it's part of you. I could sense that my body was wearing out. And I think I was about 34, 35 by then. Might have been 35, yeah, 30, yeah, something like that. 34, turning 35. And it's not easy because you've spent a fairly substantial part of your life, 18, 19 years, at various AFL, VFL football clubs working pretty hard. So no matter how hard it is to leave, it's probably a bit harder because it becomes your football career is very much based on that routine, and the routine becomes part of your life. So when you leave, your routine is very different. And I was sad to leave, but at the same time, I was pleased to be able to give my body a rest. Not easy, but it's going to arrive. It's just a matter of how it turns out in the end, and so it did.
And what do you make of the legacy that you and Simon have left in football? Because you were two fantastic rucks, it must be said.
Oh, that's very kind of you. Oh, look, I don't know if there's a legacy at all. I think that Simon started playing senior football probably something like 5 or 6 years before I started playing senior football. He finished in his, I think, 30s, early-ish 30s. I finished in my sort of early-ish mid-30s. So the span of football sort of went the beginning of his career and the end of mine, because I came along was about 20 something years, 22 or 23, 24 years. So we're one or both of us were involved in AFL football for a fairly significant amount of time. And I think we probably hold the record for two brothers playing the most games, which is a nice record to have. So is there a legacy? I'm not sure. I was involved with the Players Association as Simon was. I think we were able to make a contribution through the Players Association, and probably the conditions that players have now, which aren't too bad. Much of that was based on the initial platform we helped establish with the Players Association, which I think we probably contributed a lot more to the general well-being of for footballers of today through that, rather than necessarily our ruck work, because the game of a ruckman or a ruck has changed significantly through the course of the last few decades.
What was it like to be involved with the Players Association, because you were the president for around 7 years or so?
Oh, look, it was interesting because towards the end of my career, the game changed from being the whole game became corporatised. So the employment conditions changed from being part-time semi-professional to the expectation that players would become full-time professionals. And that changed the way in which players thought about their livelihood and the conditions they played under, particularly if they were going to be injured and potentially not be paid for the matches they were injured through. So the players' expectation at the time changed. That changed the way in which the Players Association needed to go about its business, and everything became a bit more professionalised. And it wasn't easy, because the AFL didn't want to change with it. They introduced basically the salary cap, the standard player contract, and the draft all in one go, and we had to negotiate with the AFL pretty solidly to try and get minimum conditions, particularly in the standard player contract. And we didn't necessarily agree with the draft, but we were prepared to allow the draft to happen. I think in New South Wales with the rugby league, similar things happened, but they fought very hard against the draft. So they don't have a draft, but we do. And but I think our initial conditions that were established at that time were significantly superior to what the rugby league. So there was a sort of give and take, and we felt that the minimum conditions were more important, and over time you could build on those, and that's what's happened. So anybody that plays AFL football today, the conditions are pretty good and they're pretty well remunerated, no matter whether they're at the start or towards the end of their careers.
And then after football, you got involved with politics. How did getting involved with politics come about?
That was very much for the Players Association. When we went through that period of time when we had to determine those minimum conditions, for me that was sort of, I didn't have a whole lot of expertise in that, so I went around to the union movement and asked for advice, the labour movement and the union movement, and through that I developed contacts and a bit of a network. I joined the Labor Party, and then on very short notice in 1999 I was approached to run for the Victorian State Parliament, and agreed, and to my surprise we won the election, and I ended up being a minister, much to my shock. And I was involved as a parliamentarian in the Victorian State Parliament for 15 years, and finished up in 2000, what was it? Yeah, 2004. 2014, and that was great as well. It's not dissimilar from being in a football team, really. You've got a cabinet of 18 people sitting around the table. You've all got to work as a team. Other people in your team have aspirations to be part of the leadership group, and people within your own side who are not in the cabinet, a bit like a team, have aspirations to be in the seniors. So it's not dissimilar. So you've got to balance working as a team and being at your best, knowing that there are contenders for your position within your own side who will take that up the drop of a hat if you're not performing.
And just finally as well, what do you make of where the Carlton Football Club are at the moment?
Very good question. I think they're in a difficult position because they've got some very talented senior players, like older players, who are, have probably got 3 or 4 more years left. Probably they don't necessarily have the depth on the list that they might like. So a few injuries here and there, and they don't have necessarily the equivalent depth to call upon in the list. So they've got some challenges as to how they develop their list in the next 2 or 3 years to try and improve their performance and do justice to those long-serving, very talented senior players who've given a lot over their careers so that they can achieve a high degree of success in the next few years. So there's some pretty significant challenges. And I think, their strength and conditioning needs to sort of lift a bit. And I think their skill under pressure needs to improve. Now, how you do that, I'm no expert in coaching because I don't have any really expertise in coaching. But, as an armchair critic from sitting in my comfortable chair in the lounge room, I do sometimes scratch my head at the way in which sometimes the team plays. But that's like probably many Carlton supporters at this point in time.
Well, thank you so much, Justin, for joining me today. It was fantastic to talk to you.
Thanks, Fletch. I hope this goes well, and thanks for the chance to have a chat.